So, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation. Before we get into the detail of that, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. My name is Julian Schwarzenbach. I'm chair of the BCS Data Management Specialist Group, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, and particularly welcome our speakers and the opportunity to sort of share insights with them. But firstly, what I want to do is just do a very, very quick plug for forthcoming event that we've got coming up. So this, as you can see on the screen, nice present green slide. I wouldn't say saved by the bell, but that's not quite. So you may be familiar, the strapline, the BCS, is making IT good for society. So our annual joint event with Dharma UK, we thought we'd have a go at making a play on that and saying, well, how about making data good for society? So we've got a whole range of speakers going through. So if you can get to the next slide, please, John. Brilliant. So between 14th and 18th of June, we're running a virtual conference. So similar format to last year, which worked very successfully, where we're doing 2 webinars a day at 11 o'clock and 4 p.m. each day. So that means that you don't get Zoom overload. And the lineup of speakers that we've got is really impressive. So we've got Beth and Charnley from DCMS, who'll be talking about the National Data Strategy. Neil Trump from the Dudley Group NHS Foundation Trust. We'll be looking at data and the pandemic. We've got a whole range of not-for-profits represented. So we've got Millie Zamita from the Open Data Institute, Carly Redhead and Sam Colchester from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, and Nick Soros from DataKind. So they're all going to be explaining a little bit more about how they make data good for society. I've got a particularly good speaker on the afternoon of Wednesday when we've got Mark Enzer, who is from the Centre for Digital Built Britain and also is Chief Technology Officer for Mott MacDonald, who will look at data for the public good and the National Digital Twin. Catherine O'Keefe is well known as an author and speaker and trainer on ethics. So she's going to talk about ethics on Thursday morning. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have Stuart Kitney from the National Physical Laboratory talking about data science metrology. So all in all, we've got a range of speakers there. And the final session we're having there is going to be a panel debate where we're going to get a number of the speakers together to discuss some of the topics and themes that have come out throughout the week. So as I mentioned, that is now available for booking. If you follow the link that's on the screen there, so that's dmsg.bcs.org, that should take you to the DMSG homepage, and the main event that we've got listed is there, so you can then read a little bit more about the synopses and the bios. So, about to hand over to our speakers. Just a quick reminder again, if you can keep your microphones on mute, that would be great. If you've got questions for John or Tim, if you could type them into the chat, and I will then ask them on your behalf when we get to the Q&A session towards the end. So first off, we've got 2 very accomplished, very knowledgeable speakers today. So we've got Tim King, who I've known and worked with for quite a number of years now. He is the ISO 8000 convener, as well as being a consultant for Babcock, and has got a huge amount of knowledge and good thinking around data. But he's going to give us a very quick update on the current lay of the land with ISO 8000, which is the family of standards around data quality. We're then going to have, the main speaker today is John Alvis, who is from the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and he's very keen, very passionate on data and trying to put structure into what is, John and I have had talks before, you've got quite an interesting, complex environment and also with some interesting, complex stakeholders that you're working with. So without further ado, what I'll do is hand over to Tim, and the floor is yours, Tim.
Excellent. Thank you, Julian. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, John, for showing me the first slide. So, yeah, Julian, a few months ago now, threw me a message saying, did I want to talk again to Data Management Specialist Group? And I'm sure there are probably a few of you in the audience that have heard me speak several times to the group over the years. Not that that particularly worries me. I'm always willing to go anywhere to talk to anybody. And of course, nowadays that actually means not traveling any further than my computer. But very close to that time, I was sitting in one of our ISO meetings, working group meetings, developing ISO 8000, when one of our colleagues from the US made a comment which sounded rather flippant at the time, because he suggested that the Nursing and Midwifery Council from England were showing an interest in ISO 8000, and I somewhat scratched my head, and then a little bit of Googling led us to John. And so the good news is that rather than everybody having to listen to me waffling away again, we very much wanted to make John the highlight of today, not least because what this does show is a very strong case study where somebody who hasn't been involved directly in development of the standard has found the standard and then gone and used the standard for delivery of an impact on their own organization. So this is a very powerful use case for somebody like myself who's responsible for trying to develop the standard to the best possible levels of capability. And it's really gratifying to discover that real users are actually being able to make use of the standard itself. Now, usually when I start this sort of presentation about ISO 8000, many of you have probably heard me speaking, and I would have used the Mars Climate Orbiter with the famous incident where a single data value in a single data file was the fundamental cause of the mission failing. The spacecraft entered the atmosphere of Mars and was destroyed. But I did think, given John's interests, that I might just search around for one or two other examples on this occasion. So John, if we have the next slide, please. So here's an example of what happens when we don't get things quite right. I have tried writing to the BBC and they haven't replied yet, which is a slight disappointment. But to cut a long story short, if you look very carefully at the right-hand graph, which is the original data from South Africa, eventually one can work out that the x-axis on the left-hand side, as shown by the BBC, has of course taken the date of 5th of January from last year, 2020, and the date of 6th of February is this year, 2021. And hence, instead of having two COVID peaks in the course of essentially 1 month, that's actually the history over a period of 13 months. So very, very easy, of course, for us to make data not work quite as well as it should do. And John, if you show the next slide, we'll move to another example, which I'm sure all of you that are UK based probably heard this one on the news. And again, boils down by coincidence, if you like, with the Mars Climate Orbiter situation. This is another problem of units of measurement. And in this case, this very normal young man eventually got called to say that he needed a vaccine, and he thought, this is a bit strange because I'm not on the risk list. But this was purely driven by the data and this mistake that he'd been registered as being 6.2 centimeters. So John will obviously go on and explain the real challenges in the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Although when we first met him and spoke with him, we of course did start off with the rather obvious and lame joke that were they really having that much of a problem counting babies? But he will explain to us some of the challenges they've got. But let me just remind you where we are with ISO 8000. So if we look at the next slide, and again, if you click, John, this is the overall diagram that we draw to show everything that we've got in the standard itself. And again, some of you will have had to suffer me talking through this at great length. But if I just summarize that very quickly with another click, John, what we've got, in fact, is a whole series of standards, different parts to the overall standard. And this gives us a comprehensive capability. And we are, so we've already got 23 parts there, which is giving us a range of capability, but we're still looking to carry on extending that. And that's what's come up there. And this is everything from thinking further about what's the relationship between data quality and data governance, as well as starting to look at some of the specific areas of data quality that perhaps are becoming a hot topic. For instance, of course, Internet of Things becoming a prevalent capability that people are looking to deploy. And another one which is generating a lot of interest, but we're still trying to work out what if you like, the consensus view is to give us a foundation for the standard, is very much trying to think about a risk-based approach to data quality as well. So for those of you that have an interest and an expertise in this topic, you are more than welcome to contact me, and we can get you onto the journey of potentially joining the ISO working group itself. And we're always willing to accept expert submissions from people that have an interest in the topic. So I think that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. And John, over to you, please.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim and Julie. And just a quick comms check, just making sure everybody can hear me. Tim, can you? It is working. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So, good afternoon. As you've heard from my colleagues Tim and Julian, my name is John Alvis. I'm the Data Governance Manager at the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Now, as you said, I mean, my journey into ISO 8000 has been an interesting one. Started out, applied for the job as Data Governance Manager, 2 years ago? Yeah, pitched the idea of using ISO 8000 as an international standard for data quality in my interview. And following that, did a bunch of reading yeah, started to apply the standard to our work. So what I thought I would do is under this wonderful banner from Master Data and Catalogues to Matrons and Cots, what I thought I would do is start off by introducing the problem space. So I'm assuming that I've noted from the chat that we do have some folks in healthcare here. Hello, welcome, fellow healthcare informatics people. But what I thought would be important to do is to introduce the problem space, understand a little bit more about what it is that we do, where we're working, and therefore what problems we are likely to encounter. So what is the NMC? The Nursing and Midwifery Council, NMC, is the professional regulator for nurses, midwives, and nursing associates in the UK. Now that means that we have 3 categories of people that sit on our register. We refer to them all collectively as registrants, and we collect information about them and a bunch of other bits and bobs as well. Now, the regulator role demands data that supports the vision of the public support of receiving safe, effective, and kind care. We do have a collection of different values, and among them, obviously, is not only fairness, but also kindness. And believe it or not, both of those things can be really very well supported by good data quality. The other one, incidentally, is the fact that we're collaborative and ambitious, which again, you will see later. So what does that really mean, though, by the numbers? Well, we are an international regulator, not only across the 4 countries of the UK, but also we actually work in collaboration with 375 regulators worldwide. When someone from outside the UK registers to be a nurse, midwife, or a nursing associate, we have to establish a relationship with their regulator in their home country in order to be able to assess their qualifications, make sure that they are qualified to work in the UK. We currently have over 700,000 registrants on our books, and something in the order of about 2 million records within our systems. As I mentioned previously, we do actually cover all 4 countries of the UK, so we do have a physical presence in each of those different geographies. And we collaborate with the 8 other UK medical regulators. They sit under the Professional Standards Authority, which is our regulator. So, who watches the watchers? Well, the PSA does. In total, we have around 7 million documents that are related to each of our individuals, so each of the registrants who are on our register. And we have 4 key systems which we are intending to integrate. Now, the thing with that is that, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's a system that it was less planned, more it sort of evolved over time. So there is a lot of XL ETL, as my manager Tarek nicknamed XL ETL, basically being, okay, well, I've got information in my system on the left, I've got information that I need to get it to my system on the right. How do I do that as a normal user, as someone who is not a developer? Well, Excel. It's the shortest distance between 2 points. That can mean that we end up in situations where, as I'm sure a lot of organizations do, that there's sort of one mother spreadsheet that sits in between these systems that data people are not necessarily aware of, without which the whole system can collapse, which is terrifying, and I'm sure happens everywhere. But you know, we're aware of it. We are starting to own it. So what's the problem? Well, in 2019, the NMC decided to move 3 of their systems, all of them on MS SQL, physical servers, to Microsoft D365, which obviously is a cloud-based platform. However, as previously mentioned, we've got 2 million registrant records. So obviously we've got the 700,000 who are currently on the register, the live active ones. But we've also got a whole load of history. We've got some archives in there that we need to deal with. Each of those different systems was purchased for a different area of the business, and so therefore they exist in silos. This means that despite the fact that they have to work with each other, as indeed we all do, those systems don't necessarily have connections to each other, at least not direct ones. I had a look at the sort of the wiring diagram for the NMC, and it's complicated. It's not straightforward. It doesn't necessarily follow our business processes, and that's okay. We understand it. We've checked it. We've mapped it, but we can do better. The other issue, funnily enough, and this is where, as a linguist, I get to nerd out a little bit. We didn't always have consistent definitions for the business concepts that we were using. I'll give you a case in point. People who are from an IT background here, if I said the letters FTP to you, I would imagine that you probably hear that and you just go, right, okay, yeah, FTP, file transfer protocol, obviously I'm going to be using that. In our organization, that means fitness to practice. That is an investigative process that we use for when a registrant or a nurse midwife or nursing associate may have done something wrong, and we get a referral from the public to investigate it. That's like day 1, week 1 stuff. But equally, we have issues even between teams. When we look at our location data, which I'm doing at the moment, in our database, we have 2 different relationships, parent organization and employer, or employer and site. And then when we go into our business-led systems, they refer to them as trust and employer, which is really annoying because of the fact that we use the word employer twice to mean 2 different things. We have multiple overlapping master and reference data lists. Master data in this case being data over which we are the authority, so the register is probably the best example of that. There's no one else who's going to tell you who is a nurse midwife or nursing associate in the UK. But also multiple overlapping reference lists. We worked for some time to identify how many lists of countries of the world we have. And unfortunately, they don't always talk to each other, so we can't always do the kind of research that we want. When we talk to our users and our stakeholders, quite often in the data and BI department, people will come back to us, and I'm sure you've probably heard this before as well. People will come back to us and say, "Oh yeah, the data quality is really poor. We don't like the data. We don't trust the data." And then someone like me will come along and say, "Okay, well, how do you define data quality? What is quality data to you?" And they go, "Well, this data is rubbish." Why? Why is this data rubbish? What makes this useless for you? How can we make this better? And the very, very last bit there is that particularly our senior stakeholders have very big ambitions, and that's brilliant. That's really, really good. But also, so a lot of their future ambitions are based on the data that we hold and the data that we collect. But they have some pretty big reservations about what exactly we're going to do. What is the cloud? How is that going to work? What data do we have? How can we make the best opportunity or take the best advantages out of the systems that we're going to be using? So we have, like I say, we have a huge amount of data. We have a lot of very talented, very passionate people, but we need some way of aligning those things together and making sure that when we talk about, say, an employer in this context, we really understand what that means. Like all of us uniformly understand what that means before we can really move our sort of 3 disparate systems where we can have those 3 definitions, that's not a problem, onto one platform and then use that going forward. So, chapter 2. Basically, where do you start with this lot? So, as I've said before, we have a fairly significant amount of data that we're working with. We have a fairly complex situation that we need to deal with. So I thought I would start from the ISO 8000 framework, from the standard. So basically, we know that there's a lot of complex and interacting data, which works kind of as it stands, but we can do better. So how do we do better? Well, the first thing that I did was I sat down and I read the ISO 8000 framework. I was fortunate that my manager was good enough to let me spend a couple of weeks just reading through the documentation, basically taking all the learning out of it and saying, okay, what does that mean to us? What does that mean to us? So what standards do we want to apply? Obviously, there's ISO 8000, but as veterans will know, there is also 11179 that sits underneath that, 22745. There's other stuff that we need to do. How does that work? How do we make that work for us? Bearing in mind that this was designed for manufacturing, so a lot of the examples talk about parts and examples with bolts and wing nuts and so on and so forth. How do I make that applicable to a person? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the information that we deal with is about people. So the next step is then to understand the business. What is it that we do in the Nursing and Midwifery Council? Well, we do, obviously, we check qualifications in order to make sure that someone can register. We quality assure education programs within universities. We investigate things when things go wrong. Those are 3 different use cases for our data. Some of that data overlaps, some of it doesn't. What is it that we can do to understand the business and make sure that when we do apply a single enterprise-wide rule, a rule that applies across the entire business, that we're definitely taking into account all of those different use cases? The next step was to understand our data pain points. Now, I talk about pain points. Again, I'm sure you've come across this in your own organizations, but when you talk to all of your stakeholders, not just your senior ones, but everybody who works with data, there'll always be someone somewhere that says, oh, well, I tried to do this thing in my system, or I tried to build this report and I couldn't because, or the system won't let me, or I've built this thing in Excel because I couldn't do X in another system. Incidentally, I know I'm wailing on Excel. Excel as a platform, perfectly useful, really quite impressive, and I've built most of my career on it, frankly. But as a permanent solution, we really need to be looking at something else. It's a great tool for what it does. It's not a permanent solution for a lot of things. That next point then is understanding your key stakeholders, and I can put that in bold because again, IT veterans will know it's very easy to get systems to talk to each other as a general rule, like getting your data to talk to each other is actually not that challenging. The difficult bit is making sure that your stakeholders really understand exactly what's going on in as far as they need to, and also that they're engaged with that process. Really making sure that you understand your key stakeholders, understanding why they're using the systems, what they're using them for, what they want to be able to do, and what they need to be able to do, which may not necessarily always be the same thing. Doing those things is critically important because your stakeholders are what will drive your ability to do all of the things that you need to do in order to fix this. And very lastly, tailoring your solution. It is all well and good showing up, as indeed I did, with a big old stack of ISO documentation and saying, well, you want an NMC data quality strategy, it's that. There it is. Read it, enjoy it, that's your thing. Can I have the check, please? It's all very well saying that, but realistically, you need to be able to tailor this to your own use cases. And as I said before, taking understanding of how we can map a class of, for example, a registrant, and then understanding the data requirements that we have underneath that is important to be able to explain the terminology that you've picked up into the language of the business that you're sitting in. So, okay, so what are the moving parts? We know that when I arrived, there was an existing sort of data, some existing data quality work had already been done, and there was some existing data governance framework, albeit nascent. We had a data governance board which is our central sort of organising framework that enabled us to make decisions about data across most of the enterprise. And within that data governance board, we knew that there were some existing pain points. We knew that there were some things that people definitely wanted to get fixed, and they saw the data governance board as the vehicle to get that done. There were also some relevant business processes. There are business processes that were going on that had data quality problems or data quality non-conformities built into them that we needed to fix. There were some other strategic data initiatives. I mean, I talked about our move from moving from on-premise systems to the cloud. There are some other strategic data initiatives that are involved as well that require good source data in order to be able to build those things onto the high level. We needed to make sure that we understood who our enterprise decision-making bodies are, and that's a really, really critical point, because when we talk about data quality and we talk about making decisions for a whole business in this case, we also need to make sure that when the rubber hits the road, when we are actually connecting all of these decisions that we've made to the real world, that there is an equally powerful body that is able to actually enact those changes. So case in point, we were talking about multiple countries previously. Changing that to a single list, in this case, the ISO list of countries. Yeah, right, I know where my bread's buttered clearly. But changing this to the ISO list of countries and having that as the standard across the organization meant engaging multiple different suppliers, multiple different stakeholders in different areas who needed to understand why we were making this change, why we were making it at the same time, and how we can do that in the most effective way. And lastly, we needed to understand our data-related goals. As you can tell, I clearly very much agree with the sentiment that no data presentation is complete without a reference to XKCD, which is a wonderful online webcomic. That bottom one really does come back to me over and over again. Our field has been struggling with this problem for years. We'll try it with algorithms. Wow, this is really hard. Like, this problem is really super hard. Part of the reason that these problems can be hard for algorithms is because of the source data that we're training them on. Computers can be very smart, they can also be very stupid. Sometimes it's the source data that we're working with that can be the problem. So, what are the blockers? I know I'm painting a very apocalyptic picture at the moment, but we will get better. What are the blockers? Well, the first one is trust issues. When people look at their data, sometimes they can be quite scared that their data kind of more resembles this muffin. When you bite into it and you're expecting a jam center, you end up with broccoli. Now, let's not say broccoli is necessarily a bad thing or that this is necessarily a bad product. It's not what I expected. And that means that maybe I might struggle to trust the data that I'm working with. Siloed working is also an additional issue. For example, we know that, for our registrants, registrants are given a registration number called PIN, Professional Identification Number. We also use that three-letter acronym PIN to mean three different things elsewhere in the business behind the scenes. How can we make sure that, oh yeah, okay, maybe in this area of the business, I said PIN, I know that I actually mean something else. When I talk to another area of the business and I say PIN, I actually mean this thing that's contextually relevant. How can I manage that? Definitions. I really mean this. When you're talking within an organization, really, really key and most important above all else is making sure that when we are having a conversation and I say something, you understand exactly the same meaning. I'm communicating the same meaning. I'm making sure that my definitions actually are universal. Because many times previously in my career, I've seen conversations break down because of the fact that I'm saying one thing and someone else is hearing another. This is very, very important. Next up, process. What process? Is making sure that we communicate. If we've designed a process, some of which we'll go into later, if we've designed a process that we want people to follow, how do we communicate it? How do we make sure that other areas of the business who may not know who I am or who the data governance team are, how do we make sure that they're following that process? How do we make sure that they engage with us so that we can help them out? And I know the broccoli muffin is terrifying, but we will move on from that slide soon enough. The next one is paperwork. Ugh, paperwork. One of the things that is absolutely critical to understanding your data quality landscape is understanding those business processes, understanding not only the processes that drive the business, but also the data process that sits underneath that. It is a very, very rare person indeed that can go to the business with a straight face and say, okay, I need to map your data processes. We're going to sit down, we're going to work them out, and to get someone on the other end who is very enthusiastic about that concept. Now, we do need to do it. It is critically important. It's absolutely something that we need to do. Selling that can be quite challenging, and making sure that we sell it with the benefits of doing the paperwork, basically doing your homework, so that we can get those real positives out of the way, is important. And lastly, capacity and priority. In any business, it would be foolish to say that while data quality is critically important and it is the driver for your success, it is not always the first thing on people's lists. We need to be aware of that. We need to be able to work with that, and it is important. So making sure that we have capacity to be able to deliver things, and making sure that we get the priority that we need on top of that. So, what tools do we need? Let's start talking about the positives. So, I developed a data governance framework, which we'll go through later on, which basically pulls together all of these different items, all of the different things that we need to do in order to address our data governance, data quality issues. We need a data quality framework. So we need to understand both the organizational structure of how all of your, how the organization fits together, how decisions are made. And also we need a data quality approach, basically okay, we've got the organizational structure, brilliant. We do also need to understand how we enact those changes. We need some data governance artifacts. I can see in the chat someone's mentioned the data dictionary. Yes, correct. We are going to need a corporate dictionary, a business glossary, something that tells us what our business concepts mean. But also we're going to need to know what those things look like as data. So I go back to my registrant example. Registrant is nurse, midwife, and nursing associate. That's part of its corporate definition. However, because of the fact that that is a human person will have a first name, a surname. Those things will have certain levels of formatting that are applied. They'll have a date of birth. Because we are a UK organisation, that date of birth will be held in the UK format. They'll have an address, which will have a certain number of lines. They'll have a postcode as part of that. And it's really, really important that we capture that as a single vision across the organisation, because registrants are the most important thing to us. He says after the day of the International Day of the Nurse, which was yesterday. So our registrants are the heart of our business. They're the heart of our organisation. We need to make sure that when we are moving their data around, we do that in a standardised fashion. We also look at data risk assessment. And data risk assessment is an approach that we developed off the back of the ISO 8000 approach. And it seeks to sort of collapse all of the requirements that they have about checking for data quality and making sure that you've got data quality rigor together into a single horrible looking process, but we'll show it later, which enables us to apply the proportionate amount of governance to each of our data sets. So making sure that all of our data sets are covered, but that we apply proportionate governance at each stage so that we don't end up just doing paperwork for paperwork's sake. We need to make sure that we have centralised master data. That example with the list of countries, also true of a lot of other things that we use. So we need to make sure that our master data is centralised in one place and then can be either pushed or queried by other systems within our enterprise architecture. Lastly, we need to make sure that we've got both data, technical and behavioural data quality improvements. Now, this is critically important because it's very easy, well, comparatively easy for us to adjust or design or change the way that we present our data capture systems or our data processing systems to include validation, to include things like making sure that someone doesn't, when we ask for a date of birth, they don't enter their date of registration, today's date instead of their date of birth, things like that. We can put in systems to validate that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's people that record, manage, and process data. So we need to make sure that the people that we have are trained well enough to spot these kind of data quality issues, to be able to make sure that they feel empowered enough to be able to deal with them themselves, as well as as part of the sort of the overarching thing. So, the data governance framework. This is basically my plan on a page. It is my Bible. It is the thing that I refer to when we are doing work. It's broken down into 3 segments. As with any change profile, we look at people, processes, and technology. The order of them is not an accident. We are putting people first and foremost because the fact that at the end of the day, it's the people that make and break this. I've mentioned it before, it is critically important. Make sure, top left, first thing that you do, comms and engagement. Always, always, always be talking to people, promoting data governance, promoting data quality. If you're doing this yourself, this is absolutely key. Data is no longer something that exists in a server cupboard in the top of a GP practice, which I'm now remembering was incredibly warm. That is not where data quality sits. We all do something to do with data and data quality every day when we're working with computers. Comms and engagement, critically important, making sure that people are involved. You'll also notice that we've got process and technology underneath there, and that technology is at the bottom. Technology for me is a foundation upon which we build everything else. So we need to make sure that, like I say, technology, it's not that we're saying that we're delivering technology last or we're thinking about technology last. It is the foundation on which we build everything. So going through this, first off, we've got comms and engagement. I've talked a little bit about that. Trying to make data quality and data governance as accessible as possible is pretty important. As a slightly silly example, we have recruited a data governance badger, Milton, who featured in our previous one. Now, while that is a little bit silly, we have created him a little Facebook profile, and we're working with him. We do our comms and engagement, a lot of it through Milton, and we find that people actually do respond to that a little bit better because of the fact that it's something that's a little bit more lighthearted. But equally, we need to make sure that whatever it is that we do, people can engage with, that people understand what it is that we're dealing with. So we engage at least on a weekly basis with everyone. And we created a comms plan, which enables us to speak to our senior stakeholders as well on a regular basis. We have a data governance board. Now that means that we have a collection of all of our data owners, people who are able to make strategic decisions about data, along with all of our data stewards, those who are a little bit closer to the data. We have those people together. We meet with them once every month. We make sure that any decisions that we need to make at an enterprise level go through the data governance board. So then that way, everybody in the business, through their data owner, gets a say in how we do these things. So, for example, our choice of a list of countries, choosing the ISO list of countries, was a decision that we made through the data governance board. Choosing how and where we update our list of regulators. So I talked about the 375 that we work with. They are changing all the time. How we manage that decision was taken through the data governance board. It helps to give it a little bit of legitimacy, but it also means that other people can be represented. They can show where a piece of data changing will have an impact on their business. We need to look at staff training and education, also very important. We look at our recruitment of data owners and data stewards, who I've spoken about before, as well as moving on, looking at things like data quality continuous improvement. I say it quite often, data quality is for life, not just for Christmas, particularly in the ISO meanings of the terms. When we look at data quality, we do a baselining exercise, but once we've done that, you need to keep on top of it. It is a continuous improvement cycle that we need to keep going in order to make sure that we stay on top of our data quality. It is not something that's done once and finished. Our master data management, making sure that we've got, we understand what our master data is, and also making sure we understand where it sits, very important. We need to define our terminology. It goes back to my point on the business glossary, making sure that we understand what we mean by centralised terms. Next one is quality by design. Now this one talks about how we design our systems and how we engage with enterprise architecture. We need to make sure that when we are designing any new system, particularly as we're going from a set of systems that's on tin into the cloud, as we're designing our new system, we need to design quality into those systems based on our understanding of what the data quality is like right now. So, under technology, we have the data governance artifacts, which I kind of alluded to, things like the corporate dictionary. We have a metadata registry that we're building, and a collection and a reports catalogue, which is critically important as well. We want to standardize our data at rest. Where we have data within our systems, we need to make sure that, in as far as we can, we've standardized it so that we can get, so that, let's say we have a case in our fitness to practice bit, that case can be moved around the system. It doesn't matter where it is. We always know that it's going to be in a single format. This means that we can start to standardize our data transfer. Now, our data transfer is with, particularly with our other regulatory partners. But by trying to standardize, at least in-house, if we have a standard format that we always send information in this way, and we always receive it in a similar way, then we can help to make the whole process a lot more efficient for everybody else. I'm sure a lot of people who've worked in informatics and tried to establish an API or a SFTP process with others will appreciate that one. So, what does our framework look like? Well, fundamentally, we have an organizational structure that deals with the 7 different areas of the organization. I'm going to skip over what those actually mean right now because it's really not important. We have 7 different departments within the organization, directorates, for which we have at least one data owner, at least one data steward, who manage data quality on an operational level. These are the people who work with the data every day, all the time. They are represented at the Data Governance Board, which has a sort of straight line, kind of line into our architecture and design board, who are the people who are developing our future systems. In turn, they report to the executive board on a regular basis, largely about data quality issues, but also about how we're managing data quality. It's one thing to say, yeah, we've got problems. It's another thing to say, well, we've got problems. This is how we intend to solve them. This is the progress that we've made. That's how our data quality reporting works on a monthly basis with the executive board. And above all of that is council, because of the fact that we are the Nursing and Midwifery Council. The council part is the last most senior stakeholder that we have. So what's our data quality approach? Again, with apologies to Randall Monroe and XKCD for nicking his pictures. First off, we have an initial consultation with people. We establish a scope and scale of our data quality exercise, work out who the key players are in business, and then we agree with the business how we're going to manage their data quality. Next up, we hold a workshop with some of those key stakeholders. We look at how their existing data quality work is working. We identify what quality means to them. Now, this is a critical part of the ISO 8000 approach, is that they take the ISO 9001 definition of quality, that quality is what matters to the business, basically what the business defines as quality. If the business doesn't care about it, officially we don't like that. So what we do is we work with the business to create a dashboard that tracks what they define as high quality data, or as the data quality artifacts they wish to resolve. We then review that and create a data quality action plan, which enables them to take charge of their own preventative efforts, so whatever it is that we're going to put in place to stop them collecting bad data in the future, and also their remedial efforts. So what do we do about data that they've got that isn't quite right? So we agree a plan to cover that, to fix that root cause, and then correct any existing data. But then we go into a continuous monitoring cycle. So we start to do that continuous improvement work with them. The data governance team supports in that. So what are the data governance artifacts? Well, I've talked a little bit about them. Fundamentally, we have the corporate dictionary, which we created, which I built as an app. So this is a Microsoft Power App for those who are playing along at home. It is available on mobile. We tend to use it on browser. But the cool thing about this is this is available to everyone in the NMC. So anyone in the NMC can, if they want, look up a given concept, and they can find a little mini data dictionary that describes what each of those concepts should look like as data. Now, the actual format for that in the back end is described in the ISO standard that we've listed there. So the cool thing about this is that we are using this to try to gather the information that we need, manage the information that we need, and also satisfy a requirement for ISO 8000 accreditation. But we're also building it. We are developing it. At the moment, we've just got very, very simple stuff that contains business definitions and a couple of little identification guides. On the next page, we will be looking at developing a data dictionary and a metadata registry, starting to register all of our data, show who the data owners are, who the stewards are, what the data quality rules are that are assessed to that, build up more identification guides, and even have a list of lists, a list of our master data to make sure, including our definitions of key performance indicators, so that we've got all of that data held centrally. We'll be looking at a list of business processes and associated data flow diagrams. This comes from our existing data quality work, and it means that we can really understand what the impact is of changing any of our major business processes as we develop further. So I've mentioned data risk assessment before. I'm going to touch on this very, very briefly because obviously I'm conscious of time. But fundamentally, data risk assessment is an approach to identifying a level of risk attached to updating, changing, or adding a data set within the NMC. Now, effectively, what we do is we go through a set of standardized questions and populate some of our databases as we go along the way. And it's designed to provide us with a proportionate level of governance that we can attach to each given data set that we come across. The only problem is, as you can see from this slide, it looks pretty terrifying. So when we do it, we tend to do it in several different stages. So to start with, we look on the left of this. We've identified our data set, and we need to identify whether or not this data set has an owner. If it does, great. It's a new data set. It's one that we want to register. On the left-hand side, all of these different processes are what we do to register a data set. If there's DPIA required, we do that. We collect all of that information and hold it in our metadata registry. Once we've done that, we can then say, okay, is this something that should be managed by the business? Is this something that's important enough that we really want to start to look into the data quality properly? If it's not, we can just give them some guidance and sort of say, you know what, actually, this doesn't really matter that much. John's list of platypus facts that he's been putting onto Facebook Workplace is useful data, but it's not actually, it's not business critical. We don't worry about that. So we can just give them some generic guidance. If it does need to be managed, then we can do a data quality risk assessment. We can generate a report. This looks at doing profiling basically on the data. We understand a little bit more about what systems interact with it. And we understand a little bit more about the actual quality of the data inherent. Once we moved over to that side, so we've registered the data set, we do this once. We update it if we need to change something. The next step then is actually managing that data. So, okay, so we need to check out whether or not this is master or reference data, because obviously if it's master or reference data, that's really important to us. That is something that's definitely going to need assessing. And one of the processes that we do here is called data impact assessment. And this is what all of this is about. We deliver a very simple score that says either it's low, medium, or high impact to our systems. Our data impact assessment looks at things like where does the data come from originally, so looking at our provenance criteria, which again is part of the ISO 8000 standard, but it also looks at how many systems break if we change this. Everybody's been there, I'm sure, where we've added a column to an Excel spreadsheet, we're working on multiple systems, and all your formulae fail. That, but at a big scale. So fundamentally, our data impact assessment helps us to identify where we've got high-risk data sets, that if we change them, then something is going to break. The key takeaway, as I put at the bottom there, is that we need to make sure that we have proportionate governance at each stage, because if we roll out all of this for a list of a drop-down list that's existing somewhere in a system, no one's going to do it. And at the end of the day, if they're not going to do it, they're not going to comply with it the next time when it really matters, and we don't want that. So proportionate governance that people actually engage with, that enables us to do these things in a relatively light-footed way. For reference, this whole process that we've described here, actually, if you do it with one fairly major data set, can take between half an hour and an hour. It's not actually that bad. It just looks horrible because it's a giant wiring diagram. I tried to get it on one page. Right, so putting it into practice, I'm going to hopefully close up on time. Putting it into practice, let's have a look at some case studies of examples of where this has happened. So, my team, data governance team, of whom there is at least one member on the call, which is exciting. My team, data governance team, was approached by our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, EDI team, because of the fact that they had tried to do a piece of research on EDI across the NMC, so both in-house looking at our HR and also looking at our customers, our registrants. And EDI data was not recorded uniformly across the organization. And one of the problems with this basically meant that when we then tried to do comparisons across different bits of the organization, and even different systems that we were holding people's data in, we couldn't make any meaningful insight out of the other end of it, or we struggled to make meaningful insight out of the other end of it. It took a lot of work in the back end to be able to construct a report, which we were then later able to publish. So I showed up and we said, okay, well, let's follow the data quality approach. Let's do that initial consultation. Let's work with people to understand how these systems interact. So we established the issue with our key stakeholders. What exactly is it that's wrong that we want to fix? We developed a data quality dashboard. One of my colleagues, Wenyan, created an amazing piece of work, which goes through each of the different questions that we had about quality, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, and then demonstrated what our data quality actually looks like within those source systems. We negotiated what those metrics actually then meant to our key stakeholders. My favorite example from this one is that we looked at age. Age is recorded. We don't actually record age as a category on our system. We just use date of birth. But we found that for some reason, quite a few of the dates of birth in some of our older data meant that the person was over 100 years old on the day that they registered, which makes no sense at all. Or even that they were under 18. So there's definitely a problem there. And we as data people can say, well, that's definitely wrong. But where do we put that cutoff? Because, I mean, maybe someone who's 90 is very unlikely to start a career at nursing at 90 years old. And I'm sure there will be someone who takes that point. So we as data people, we can't say that that's necessarily not going to happen. How do we negotiate that with the business? How do we say, actually, these are the records we want to look into. These ones, maybe not so much. We discussed an appropriate solution. So we identified that we identified that these items are things that we can potentially prevent. So how do we work to prevent them? Simply put, by ensuring that we schedule changes from one version of our questionnaire to another. We even created some predictive risk analytics to show when the number of responses recorded on our version 2 would cross over with the kind of take over those that were negative data. So we were able to give them some forward planning, some idea of if you do nothing, this is what will happen. We then created our data quality action plan to address those issues. We tried to make sure that folks understood that there are preventative actions that we do first, and then we can start looking at correcting the data that sits in place, if indeed that's appropriate. We've also started looking at a cross-regulatory data sharing platform. Our medical regulators, certainly our sister agency, the GMC, the General Medical Council, who deal with doctors, we need to be able to share information with them. And at the moment, we do that kind of in a one-off kind of way. Colleagues in other organisations will appreciate that. We sort of say, okay, well, this is the format of the thing that we're going to send you. We'll try to send it to you on a regular basis. Here's the SFTP address, and yada, 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 yada. We don't want to be doing that every single time. So, following the ISO 8000 guidance, what we're doing now is establishing a shared corporate dictionary, an open technical dictionary, if you will, that works between regulators. So, for example, we know that when a member of the public comes to us with a problem about a registrant, nurse, midwife, or nursing associate, that we call that a referral. In the General Medical Council, they refer to complaints. Now, they are basically the same thing about fundamentally different people, but they are basically the same concept. So we should be able to exchange that information, exchange that meaning, technically using that platform. We're starting to develop some standards for information exchange. Those identification guides I was talking about, when we want to exchange case data, or if we want to exchange registrant data with people, we need to know what that looks like, and we can really speed up our development as a result. Lastly, we can also share some centralised reference data. At the end of the day, we're dealing in healthcare. Like the hospital that one of our nurses works in is the same hospital that a doctor works in, or a paramedic works in, or that a patient had an experience in. It's the same place, the same address. We can be sharing that data centrally. We can be centralising that data, and we can be using it as a platform for us to build better analytics. Next up, enterprise-wide data quality. We're looking inwards now. Data Governance Board wants to understand how our data quality looks. So again, we've established responsibilities for data quality using the ISO 8000 framework, and we started to establish some data quality metrics for each part of the organisation. We're now currently going through and going business process by business process, doing our data risk assessments on each of those different items of data, and then starting to establish data quality dashboards for those different areas of the business so that they can own their data quality. It is theirs as much as it is ours. We've got to take data quality out of that dusty GP practice server room that I was in that was very warm, and thankfully, there was tea, but still not great. We need to get it out of that and into the main part of the business. In terms of technical steps, we need to create those data quality dashboards for each part of the organization, but we need to standardize them. The reason that we do that, I know this is small fry, but if we standardize our look and feel, as well as standardizing our approach, people will understand how to navigate those bits of the system, how to get to the data that they want, and know that when they look at one part of the business and another part of the business, that the data quality metrics that they're looking at can be compared, that they're comparing apples with apples. We can create a summary statistic, and then we can share that data quality dashboard at exec level with what we're referring as tube line indicators. Those who've used the underground, Jubilee line is good, Metropolitan line is good, Northern line patchy. What we want to be able to do is do the same thing, but with our data sets, and sort of say, okay, can we pinpoint where we've got data quality problems? And if we can, do we know what we're doing about them? Can we show that sort of concomitant activity that's happening along at the same time? We also want to centralize our master data. The NMC has disparate systems. We talked about this. Many of them rely on the same master or reference data. At present, these systems do not share centralized data. So again, we're following the ISO 8000 guidelines, and we're making sure that that information is centralized in one place. I'm sorry, this is clearly an earlier version of the slides. Basically, we want to make sure that we've got a data governance server centrally within the organization. We're calling it the enterprise data governance server. That's it centrally within the organization, and other areas of the business then take that information from there. So a quick summary then. So we've still got about 5 minutes left. Quick summary. We've introduced the problem space. We talked about what the NMC is, how big the problem is, and what we're going to do about it. We talked a little bit about where do you start, because this is a big problem. Where do you start in an organization? We understand what the moving parts are, what different bits we can start to work with that enable us to do more work. We've talked a little bit about the blockers, what blockers we're going to be working with, and what tools we need in order to be able to address the problem. Then lastly, we looked at a couple of examples. We looked at EDI data, looking at equality, diversity, and inclusion, developing a cross-regulatory data sharing platform, some enterprise-wide data quality, and indeed, I became victim of my own data quality issues with relevance to the presentation, so my apologies on that. Any shared presentation will be corrected, of course. So that about wraps up. Thank you very much, everyone. If you would like to follow up, I mean, obviously we'll hand over to Julian in a moment for questions. However, if you would like to follow up, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I will happily carry on. So back over to you, Julian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was very, very informative, very clear. The comments that came through in the chat showing that I think it was very well received by the audience, but also interestingly showing that savoury muffins is obviously quite a hot debating point for various people.
I was surprised. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. So just a quick reminder to the audience, if you do have a question for John or for Tim, if you can put the question in the chat, then I'll ask them on your behalf. But interestingly, I'm just going to start with a bit of an opener question, really, which is, you obviously work in an environment where you're dealing with a management team, a board, an exec who have understood that data actually is important, that there needs to be some governance, that in effect, they've created a landscape where you can actually put all these frameworks in place. Absolutely. Many organizations are struggling to get to that point. What was it that actually got the NMC to that point where there was a recognition and acceptance for the need for data governance?
It's an interesting one, that. So I was very lucky that not my manager, but my manager's manager is an assistant director. He is hugely passionate about data. Kurum, his name is Kurum as well. Kurum's extremely passionate about data, and he had this idea of trying to encourage fundamental data governance within the NMC well before I joined, and started off sort of with some of these nascent approaches. But I think one of the major drivers, aside from that, was our sort of kind of environmental factors. And I say that because we have this big thing, modernization of technology services, MOTS, this program where we're moving all of our stuff from tin and into the cloud. And as we were doing that sort of, copy and paste of data across, all of a sudden we started to realize, actually, there's work that we can do here. There's opportunities that we've got that we can start to, we've got a clean slate over on the right-hand side here. I used the example of going from like an old mobile phone to a new one. Back when you had to do this as a manual process, you copied the contacts that you're going to use out of one and into the new one. Equally, with current systems, you would probably want to get rid of the astonishing amount of cat memes between one phone and another one in order to make sure that you've got a nice, cleaner environment. Maybe there's something we need to do there. Equally, they started having real ambitions about delivering an annual report similar to what some of our sister organisations do. And to do that, we need very, very high quality data, which we can then build it on, or at least a way of managing that data that we can build those reports on. So we made the decision strategically to invest in our data quality to make sure that that worked. So those are probably the two major things. There was also the ever-present fear of the PSA coming back to us and sort of saying, you need to sort out your data quality. So we figured we'd get involved in that before the PSA came after us.
Yeah, that's good. Question from John was an interesting one, which was he's curious to know if there are any similar approaches in the NHS. And actually, the GMC is probably the better comparator. So actually, in maturity terms, are you ahead of them? Are you leading? Are you setting out an environment for them to follow in?
Well, let's take a quick glance down my CV. As it happens, I have actually worked for both the NHS in an IT and informatics data quality capacity and in the GMC in data quality. So let's do that. So going backwards, General Medical Council, the way that they've dealt with their issues, they are very, very much aware at the moment that they do have disparate systems and they have issues with data quality. What they did instead was they created a sort of an interim platform that did all of the conversions and ETLs that it needed to do in order to create a reliable data set, which they could then build further stuff on. So instead of doing what we're doing, which is going all the way back to the source and then engineering our systems and then correcting our data quality problems, which is a much bigger task, they instead decided to build something in the middle, which enables to correct for those things. So they've got something that floats on the top, which they can then build on. In the NHS, as far as I'm aware, incidentally, they're not using the ISO 8000 standard at this stage. Hopefully, they will in the not too distant, because I have been talking to them about it. In the NHS, there was way back when an information management and technology (IMT) direct enhanced service. I can only speak for primary care at the time because this was a little while ago. Which is kind of like a kite mark called data accreditation. Which is provided to GP practices. That's one of the reasons that I was in that server room that I was talking about previously, is that you had to run queries on those systems and then check to see who had more than one gallbladder removed, for example. You only have one. Males that had given birth by caesarean section, when in fact they had been delivered by caesarean section. Things like that. So there was a couple of different things that we could do to check that data quality and then to provide an assessment of someone's data quality within GP surgery. In terms of doing that at a higher level, I'm afraid I don't know. I know that one of the clinical support units, the commissioning support units, rather, CSUs that I used to work with, did a big package of work making sure that they had a single version of the truth for secondary care data for finance. But I know that those are localized things, or at least they were when I left the NHS about 5 years ago. So that's where we're at.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so I think if anyone's interested in that subject, Dorothy has put a link in the chat about potentially as a link for some of the work that NHS are doing in this area. But I think going back to a question that Dave asked right at the beginning was really in terms of sectors that are using ISO 8000. So you mentioned it's the reference to products and product data, and I think this is a question more for Tim, is really applicability in other sectors. Are there sectors that are of something like naturally adopting ISO 8000 as their way forward? What's your views, Tim?
Yeah, so one of the slight complications, confusions perhaps for the external party is if they go and look carefully, they would discover that the work I lead, the working group I lead, is labelled as being industrial data quality and sits within an ISO subcommittee for industrial data. But in reality, what we have looked always to do is to make ISO 8000 about data of whatever type. And therefore, what's great is to discover somebody like John, and obviously you now know why it was that I was keen to put him in front of you rather than me, to hear all of that enthusiasm and passion for this subject. Coming along, finding the standard applicable to nursing and midwifery in the way that he's described. We've been through similar experiences. Network Rail used ISO 8000 as a way of addressing some really fundamental problems that they had with their regulator, the ORR. And in the end, that particular activity led to data quality being recognised as a top-level corporate risk for Network Rail, and the ORR started to build ISO 8000 into some of their guidance. So we have a strong belief that it's applicable in lots of different sectors, and of course it's an ISO activity. So I've got colleagues that are deploying the standard in South Africa, in mining and transport, healthcare in Spain, in the US, various different industries. So generally, it is a foundation for data of all sectors.
Mm. Yes, no, that's good. So I think there's an interesting question just coming through from John, Dr. Lou. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at the pronunciation there, but really, they're interested in understanding if there's any special treatment around AI and data governance and data quality management for AI, particularly when it gets to biometric authentication.
Interesting. Well, go ahead, Julian.
Well, I was going to say, I think this is probably the one where you both can have a partial view on that, because obviously it's a very specific use case. So what are the particular challenges in that area, but also how well, or are there other standards that cover that area? So don't know, Tim, do you want to go first on that?
So this is a good example where sometimes ISO takes a little time to get its act together. So there is a different committee that's looking at artificial intelligence. So we are working with them to understand what our respective contribution will be to this type of topic. One of the, don't get me started about the sort of nuts and bolts, if you like, around what quality really means. But it is important, I think, for all of us to understand that there are specific characteristics that ultimately we need to identify for our own use cases and bring those to the fore in terms of the things that are going to be most critical to what we then label as being our quality issue. So ISO 8000 gives an absolutely rock solid framework foundation in the way that John has described. But clearly you then need to go and look at the nature of the data itself to understand which characteristics are critical in the particular application that you're looking at.
So in a summary, really, the way the standards have been written is very much, it does cover across a number of different bases, but there needs to be some thinking about how to apply in a particular context. And I think also mentioning there about the AI committee, I know, as I kind of know the answer here, but it's really about avoiding reinventing the wheel of can we build on what's already there rather than creating new every time.
Yeah,
that's right. So John, I mean, in terms of any biometric stuff, is that something that you've explored at all on your side? What are the particular challenges that you can see there?
Interesting. It's actually not something that I've explored. Unfortunately, neither during my time in the NHS, although I was pushing for more sort of AI usage. Yeah, it's not something that I've really come across. I would say that fundamentally, similarly to Tim, if I were to apply the standard to it, what I would want to do is kind of understand how you categorize the data, what makes high quality data, because the fact that at the end of the day, there will be some representation of biometric data within a structure, and provided that you understand that structure, you have the right terminology in place and the right business processes ready to accept it, then I mean, I would give it a tick, but then I would probably hand it over to someone who's more engaged with AI. And biometrics specifically. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of like kind of genome sampling, that kind of thing. I mean, really, we would need to just make sure that we understand what accuracy means and how these things are attached.
Probably also around data structures, so you understand how a fingerprint, for example, is encoded in a particular consistent way, which actually gets into one of the points you made earlier about getting agreement on terms and definitions. So any particular tips for people about how you actually gain consensus to get that agreement to then get your data dictionary fit for purpose for the organisation?
Absolutely. That one, you've got a couple of different approaches for that. But the most important thing for me is to engage widely and often, and try to make sure that information is available to people. Those are probably my 2-3 things that I would say that you want to do. The biggest problem that I've seen with sort of definitions issues is that someone somewhere, quite often an external source, very firmly in cheek, will come in and they will create a data dictionary or a corporate dictionary. They will create something that says, this is the terminology, these are the answers, fine, I need that as a consultant, or someone else needs that as a part of the business. And then they'll keep it, and it'll go on a shared folder somewhere, or it'll get buried in SharePoint somewhere, and it won't get shared with people. And as a result, someone else come along and they go, actually, I need a list of business processes or a list of concepts, and I'll come in with different. So the first thing to do for my money, if you identify all of that and then try to create a single unified list, you then start to work with distributing that list, trying to democratize it in as much as you can. This is what we did with the corporate dictionary app. To provide it out to people and then say, okay, use it, have a look, do these definitions work for you? And ideally, if you can, get them approved by someone who's a subject matter expert in the area, get them approved by a department. For example, we were very lucky, the education department went through, our education capabilities department went through all of the different concepts that were in there and then said, yep, that's fine, edit it, yep, that's fine. And then we were able to record it as the authorized definition. Some of the other areas obviously are a bit bigger, so they've got a few more data points. We're doing more of a sort of a crowd-powered kind of approach. But between that, I think those are good ways of doing it. Engage it. It's a conversation. Language evolves. Make sure that you engage lots of people and often.
Yeah, that's good. And I think also it's about don't lose those definitions, because certainly in a former role in my life, working life, there was work where somebody had obviously spent a lot of time coming up with a codified way of naming assets. And unfortunately, nobody was left in the organization and there's no document that was left that knew what all those codes meant. So there's a lot of value that got lost there. Bearing in mind, running over slightly, I know that the conversation is good. We haven't actually got on savoury muffins yet, but I think probably if we end now, really, I think on a question from Tim, which I think is a good lead in really to everybody. So Tim he's saying he's currently knee deep in the production of data quality dashboards for a government department. So just getting thoughts about designing dashboards from scratch, using some pre-formatted. Did you have any resources to assist you? What's your take on trying to get a dashboard that works for an organization?
So Tim, I would happily follow up with you directly on this, because I have a lot of opinions on this. So find me on LinkedIn, we'll chat definitely. For me, the data quality dashboard is not only about presenting what the data looks like, it's also a process. Like the process of developing a data quality dashboard is as important as the end product. Mm-hmm. Because during the process, your DBA or whoever it is that's developing this will have to dig deep and find the actual source of the data. That's your first problem, and find that they can connect to it, which is the second problem. Following that, they'll then be able to interpret what the contents of that database is, and therefore start to understand a little bit about maybe the data lineage and issues that can cause those data quality problems. Once you've got to that point, you start to surface that data, you actually build your dashboard, the user-facing stuff. What I've tended to do is try to aim for a standard sort of graphical language. So you can say, okay, I know that the headline of this report is definitely going to be top right middle. I know that the most important data is going to be towards the center of someone's visual acuity, stuff like that. I use consistent coloring within each of these different things to look at certain different data types. And I try to make sure that what we do is quite clean, quite simple, so that, and use drill through functionality so that you're not overwhelming the user at each time. So rather than creating a template and then trying to apply the template, we have a set of sort of design rules that we use, and then go through that process individually for each of those different data quality dashboards. So that's, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but have a standard approach, not a standard template, would be my answer.
Yeah, and I think also what a spin-off I mentioned there about the approach is that you're probably going to surface a few more little data quirks that might be otherwise hidden in the system. So yes, really valuable insights there. So on behalf of everybody in the audience, so thank you, Tim, thank you, John, for a very useful, very informative presentation. The recording will be up on the BCS member group's YouTube channel, so the whole event's been recorded and we'll be processing that. It normally takes about a week and a half or so for the processing to be done.